Meeting to order. We've got two things on the agenda tonight. The first is the police department's request for another communication specialist to be added. So Chief Kenny, I'm just going to let you go ahead and explain the need and the financing of the need.
Sure, thank you. As I included in the request, in 2003, we picked up dispatching services for, at the time, Montville Township Police Department, Medina Township Police Department, and the Medina Township Fire Department. We staffed those responsibilities with 9 full-time dispatchers. In 2010, because of the growth within those communities and those departments, we increased the amount from 9 full-time dispatchers to 10 full-time dispatchers. Again, that was in 2010. Since then, we've consolidated with the fire department, so our fire department covers all 3 of those jurisdictions. However, we've added Lafayette Township, and if you take a look at the illustrations I've provided in the request, there's some graphics here that show the growth of the agencies that we dispatch for. So at Montville Township, when we started with them, they had 7,297 calls for service. In 2022, they had over 16,000 calls for service. Medina Township in '04 had 6,418. In 2022, they've got over 12,000 calls for service. Here with the Medina Police Department, in 2004, we had 27,000 calls for service, and last year, 2022, we had over 37,000 calls for service, actually almost 38,000 calls for service. And the fire department has grown as well with their calls for service, along with LST. Some of the reason for these increases, number one, the townships are growing around us, and also the city's infrastructure is growing. The 2 departments that we dispatch for, the 3 departments, but particularly Montville Township and Medina Township Police Departments have grown as well in personnel. Medina Township went from 8 officers in '04 to now 11 full-time officers, with the intention of hiring several more full-time officers in 2023. Medina Police Department in 2004 had 36. We're now authorized at 42. And Montville Township had the most amount of growth. They had 9 officers in 2004, and they currently have 17 full-time officers, and that actually may be higher. They passed a levy recently for additional personnel. So based on those numbers, and a few other factors that I'll discuss, we find ourselves with a need for one additional dispatcher. Number one, to handle the influx of additional calls due to the additional personnel and the additional calls for service, in addition to the addition of Lafayette Township. It also puts us in a position where when we have turnover, we go into crisis mode immediately with just 10 dispatchers. When we get short 1 or 2 dispatchers, which we've been struggling with over the past 3 years, the current dispatchers are forced and mandated to work overtime, and it really strains them. An 11th dispatcher would also help us with a relief factor when we do have sick time, call-offs, or vacations. My intent is to ask for an appropriation as well, in addition to this amendment to the Salary and Benefits Code for funding of this position. Okay. So I'm happy to answer any questions anyone has.
And Chief, did I see that you're offering the same lateral move on communications as for the communications officers you did for potential police officers?
Yes, sir. That is on the finance agenda for discussion tonight, but it is a program that mirrors the police officer lateral transfer program.
And that's obviously worked out well for you with the police.
We did hire 1 lateral candidate from a different department on this last hiring process that we had.
Okay. Thank you. Any questions from committee members?
No, I don't have any questions, but I appreciate your detailed explanation. I think it's good for the public. You know, I appreciate the way you explained it, because it's good for the public, I think, to understand, you know, why we're adding it, you know, and the reasoning and the numbers that go along with that to support it. So, no, I'm good with it, but appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Reggie?
No, I don't have any questions.
And working in safety forces for so many years, the communications operators are, you know, you always hear your system's only as good as the weakest link. The communications has to be one of our strongest links.
Yeah.
Otherwise, the other entities, you know, have a harder time completing their tasks. So I appreciate your explanation. Is there any questions or comments from other council members?
Sure. So Chief, I know that we have these arrangements with the other townships, with Montville, Lafayette, with the dispatching, and Medina. In our contracts with them, I don't recall off the top of my head, and Mayor, maybe you do, or Chief, maybe you do, on the, how are we able to recapture the cost? Because the need for the additional dispatchers, obviously, as a result of the increased calls in the other jurisdictions, how are we going to address that, or when's the next time, again, I don't remember off the top of my head, the contracts are up so we can address the financing issue of the additional need, which is driven by the dispatching needs of the other communities?
Yeah, there are 3-year contracts. I think the next one might be up in 2025, I believe. There are built-in increases, but that is based on the collective bargaining agreement. So the next year, it'll increase by 3.5%. The following year, 3.5% within this currently negotiated contract. And as you may be aware, LST covers 1/3 of the cost of the entire budget.
Right.
And essentially, that funding's coming from the townships as well. A portion of that funding's coming from the townships as well. So we take that into consideration also. But that's where some of that recuperation will come from.
Right. So I guess, the LST will cover the LST calls, but then you have the fire calls that we do and the police calls. So maybe when we look at the contract, I'm sure we keep track of the number of calls so we can show them at the next negotiation, the increase in the calls and the increase in cost on our side to cover the dispatching should be covered.
We do, and we typically do that at the onset of the negotiation for the contract.
Right.
We also want to be careful not to outprice ourselves.
Sure. No, but I mean, if we're increasing our costs, we have to just, and the main reason, of course, is because of the increase in calls.
Right.
And I don't know what the percentage is of LST calls as opposed to the fire, as opposed to the police, but I'm sure the police are probably increasing, as you mentioned, because the increased number of officers in Montville. Of course, you have increased number of calls that occur by that. So, yeah, I think we just keep track of it so we cover the cost the best we can to reflect the cost of the other communities.
And a portion of that comes from the Lafayette Township contract as well, because we're only using, right now, the money for that is only funding 2 positions, and we're getting $400,000 a year from the township. So
That makes sense. I just want to make sure that we keep track of it, because, you know, odds are the townships are going to increase, the city's not, because we're built out. So we want to make sure that we reflect the cost properly.
yeah, definitely would not be a benefit to give free services. I'll get it back.
Thank you, Mr. Coyne.
Please,
Mr.
you
Shields,
will.
do you have any comments? Anybody in the audience have any questions or comments? Mayor Hanwell? Okay. I'll entertain a motion.
I make a motion to accept the proposal as the chief explained.
And I second it.
Good. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Motion passes. Thank you. Second on the agenda, Mr. Lamb submitted a long time ago a request for discussion on underground waste containers in a historic district. So, Mr. Lamb, I'll let you go ahead and explain your request, and then we'll get some comments from the service director and other council members.
Okay, great, thank you. This is probably, I think it was a couple of years ago that I think it might have been 2-3 years ago when I actually saw this, and my request is to, we have to do a little bit more research, but my request is to consider putting in underground trash containers, like the size of a dumpster, and on the top of them, there are smaller containers so that when you walk by, you don't see the big dumpster, you just see 2 trash receptacles. And it's interesting because when I have traveled to other countries, I've always kind of looked around because of what we do here, just naturally have looked around at how other, what I might see that I think is interesting or something we might be able to borrow from another country. And I saw this when I was in Portugal. And I had seen these trash containers during the daytime, and I thought they were looked like they were on a table. And I didn't really understand why there was two cylinder trash containers on a lifted, a table that was up about this high. But I was walking at night, and I heard a trash truck. And when I saw the trash truck come to the container, they had they had an arm, and they had dropped like a hook down, and it lifted up this table with the two trash cans, and underneath was the dumpster, and they hooked it onto the dumpster, dumped it, and then put the lid back down. And when I saw that, I thought I immediately thought about they're on the visuals, I guess, where you can see how those were lifted out. When I saw it, I immediately thought about the downtown historic district, because when we frequently have to put a dumpster in the district, and on all the sidewalks we have decorative trash containers, and in the interior of the square we have decorative trash containers. So if you look at the picture now, you can see that's what that looks like. And the installation of something like this in the district would enable us, I think, to put close to 5 cubic yards of waste in that one container. That would save labor, the time it takes to dump them once a day, to dump all the trash containers on the square. The aesthetic would be wildly improved, because we would no longer have to have a dumpster on the square when we have events, or have so many little trash containers all around, because you would have a place that you can just walk up to and put it in. You can't even see it. And it also then goes into an enclosure, so it's not going to overflow. So I just thought it was an exciting thing to do. And I'm going to ask Nino to give it some detail, because when I brought this to him and I gave him my basic information, which was just from one small town in the country, and he did the research for me. And the other thing that's interesting is that these are in Europe and in South America, but from what Nina found out, they are slowly coming to North America. So,
Mr. McCauley?
Thank you, Mr. Lamb.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So when Mr. Lamb first asked me about this, I misunderstood, because I thought they were recessing like a hydraulic container above ground, and it recesses and disappears to be clean, but it's not. It's actually what you're seeing. There's a container. It's in a concrete cast, so there's a trap door, as you can see. The trap door has a concrete foundation encased where it's watertight. And then so above ground, you see the clean, modernized receptacle that allows trash to be placed, and then it goes into the below-grade container. Europe is very innovative. It's crazy how they've come up with this. They're advanced in some fashions with respect to garbage, like they burn it. They're far advanced with respect to recycling, and this is just something else that started in Europe. And as I indicated to Mr. Lamb, it is coming to North America, to the United States. It was just difficult to get pricing, because I had to email Ukraine, and then in Portugal, I've not heard back, because I would just like to see some pricing for the same, just to get an idea. Obviously, there's a cost and there's a benefit, because it's clean, the hygiene portion, aesthetically pleasing. From what I've researched, folks are placing these in airports, shopping malls, eateries outside where people are walking. You're not going to get the bees, you're not going to get the trash, you're not going to get the overflow, things of that nature that you typically get with containers like we have on the square today. The other part is, Mr. Lyman asked me how much time we spend. That's Jansen's folks that pick up the trash weekly. You see the parks guys. So in talking to Jansen briefly, because he knows it in and out, 2 of his employees, 5 days a week, spend an hour and a half with one truck picking up the historic district. So 3 hours a day, we say. It's 15 hours a week, and they accumulate about, from what we gathered in the back of a pickup truck, it's about 2 to 3 yards a day in loose trash. So the new truck we bought, that's that 13-yarder, it'll fill that truck up, if you can imagine, in a week's time. And now when there's events and special things going on the weekends, Jansen's guys, his staff come in twice a day. They come in the morning, and then they come in the evening as well, to handle the trash in the respective area And then we could get those volumes and figure out the cost. But again, just I'm not sure about the cost of these units. They are very innovative. They're clean. We did talk a little bit about the placement. I don't know if you would need them on every corner. The right-of-way on the square is particularly crowded, but there could be opportunity to place, they're below grade, so they're shared utilities. You know, we have fiber, gas, electric, all the utilities respectively, and so you'd have to have, we'd have to look at it and have placement for them. Or they could be off on the side. We talked about with Mr. Lamb being in an alley. There's definite applications for these, but again, it's something that, you know, we're talking conceptually, and it's something that what I researched is coming by 2027 to numerous countries, and it seems to be the way of the future, definitely. Jared was kind enough to post the photos. I don't know if we had them all up, Jared, to show the different hooking mechanisms. There's a hoist on the back of a truck because obviously you have 4 or 5 yards of waste. It's heavy. You're not going to tip them with, 2 people lifting it. So it's converted from a truck into the back of the hopper, which I'm not sure what that would take. But, you know, again, our folks are innovative too, and I'm sure they sell apparatus just like the can tippers that we purchased to dump the cans in the back of the truck. So where there's a will, there's a way if this is something that we want to pursue in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Picoli. I know that years ago when I was at Disney World, you'd never seen a full trash container, on the grounds at all. And I had a relative that worked there, and they said, well, that's because everything is done underground. It's just the same here. As there's a small receptacle in the front, and it goes down, but they actually have an entire city underground that they can bring the trucks in and dump them just like we normally do. But thanks for your continued work on that. And any other comments from Reg?
I think it's a great idea. My concern would obviously be the cost factor. How long would it take to recoup the cost of installing these dumpsters?
Jess, do you have any comments?
I do not thus far. Sorry.
Okay. That's okay. Oh, no, that's okay. Mr. Coyne?
This is the pictures I've seen of the pictures, and I think that at least in the square, it might be ideal to have, a couple or at least one receptacle, because he's correct. There's times when we have that big 8-yard dumpster parked in the corner, 2 of them. It doesn't, it's not very attractive. And I guess the cost mechanism of it, I'm thinking there's ways that we could be creative, and maybe there's grants available that'll be able to assist in at least the installation of it. I think the use of it and picking up the trash, because at least I remember going to the International Fest and other kind of events where the trash receptacles were so overflowing that it was just all over the ground. And I think that's what you want to try to avoid, is to try to figure a way to solve that problem. And this is definitely a way to do it.
Yeah. Mr. Rose, comment?
Thank you. Just one thought comes to mind is once we fill up the can, how do we have the equipment available, or are we going to be able, or are we going to be required to purchase new equipment to get it out of the ground and to the recycling facility or wherever it ends up?
Well, as Mr. Picoli explained, the pictures they have there, the trucks actually have a boom on them that
Okay.
they can lift out, which we don't have that now, right, Mr. Picoli?
That's correct. It's a hoist, if you will, but there's enough hydraulic reservoir on a truck to adapt to something like that. But it would have to be a purchase and a purchase that we would have to make and adapt the vehicle, which can be done. I'd be remiss if I didn't say that there could be multiple containers about recycling too. When President Coyne talked about a grant possibly, because there's opportunity to have multiple, and it would be getting the folks educated and saying, okay, this is the recycle dumpster or container receptacle, and this is trash or something organics. But there's opportunity for that as well.
Mr. Shields?
Well, it's an interesting concept. First time I've really thought about it, but
Yeah,
would like to pursue it.
Mr. Lamb, I thank you for bringing this up, and I'm sorry that it took me so long to get it on the agenda, but it is something worthwhile to research more, and kudos to you.
Yeah, and I appreciate just that we had the discussion. It was a good time to have the discussion because there was a lot, when, I asked Nino to work on it, it was a lot of stuff to try to pull together.
Sure.
Particularly because they're currently, the manufacturer and the cost and stuff they're so far away and they're not here. But I think I appreciate the opportunity just to to talk about
Right.
the possibility because it has that, like, we talked about the cost, like what is like you said, what's the cost going to be and how long to get it back? The long term, I think what we're looking at is it would be a long-term benefit because once you do the complicated part about the installation, as the service director said, get around all the other utilities that you've got to dig around. Once you get all that done, then you have something that only has to be emptied, maybe once a week or twice a week, and you'll have that cost savings, and then all the other things that are implicit in that, including the view of this, just really the view of the square, not to have, a dumpster there or so many trash containers. So,
Right.
yeah, so I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you
Ni-
very much.
Nino, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Mayor, would you like to comment? No? Is there anybody else in the audience would like to comment about this discussion here? No. If not, again, thanks for bringing it up, and if there's nothing else to come before this committee, we'll go ahead and adjourn. Thank you. Finances start in approximately 8 minutes.